Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. On this episode, I'm speaking to an FBI informant who helped build the largest insider trading investigation in US history. If you've been listening to the show for a while and that sounds familiar, you're absolutely right, because this is another return visit from Tom Hardin. As Tipper X, he wore a wire for the FBI. He's since spoken to thousands of audiences about his story and slippery slopes, rationalisation, and the fraud triangle. If you haven't heard Tom's story before, we do a very brief recap at the start. I'd encourage you to go back and listen to his previous appearances on the show, where he tells it in far more detail. You'll find links to those in the show notes. This conversation, though, is about his new book, Wired on Wall Street. It's an astonishing and deeply reflective account of his life, not just the trades that got him into trouble, but tales of his childhood, ambition and insecurities, and the drive that shaped the decisions he's made. If you've heard Tom before, you'll know this isn't a glossed over account. It's candid, analytical, and unflinching. In our discussion, we talk about why he chose to write the book now, after nearly a decade of telling the story on stage, what he learned in the process, and what writing it forced him to confront about himself. But Wired on Wall Street doesn't just tell Tom's story. It does something else too. It tells the story of someone who played no part in the decisions he made, but whose life was dramatically changed by them. And that's his wife, Sue. And I'm delighted to say that later in the episode, Sue joins us for the first time ever on a podcast to talk about what it was like from her side. You'll hear about the moment she first found out what Tom had been up to, what it meant to keep a secret she hadn't chosen, and what it's been like accompanying Tom on this unexpected journey, including now speaking publicly about it herself. As you will hear, Sue is an absolutely remarkable person. This isn't an episode that's just about insider trading. It's far more about character, about the difference between guilt and shame, between mistakes and bad decisions, and between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. It's my conversation with Tom Hardin, and later in the episode with his wife Sue, on Wired on Wall Street. Tom, welcome back to the Human Risk Podcast.
It's a pleasure to be back with you, Christian.
It's great to have you here, and obviously there's a really exciting reason that you're back on the show. But before we come on to that, for people that haven't come across you, why don't you just do a quick recap of your story?
Sure. So I'm Tom Hardin. During the financial crisis, going back a few years, I was known as Tipper X, the key informant that helped the FBI in the U.S. build the largest insider trading investigation of really all time. 81 people were arrested in the financial services industry. There was 32 cooperators, informants. And I was the most sort of well-known informant later for helping the FBI build 20 of those 81 cases.
And so you're here talking about your story because that's what you do now.
That's what I do now. And I also have a book coming out called Wired on Wall Street on the 25th of February through Wiley Publishing. So the story will be out there in the world.
Tell us a little bit about why you decided to write the book now, because one of the first questions I think I ever asked you once I got to know you was, well, surely this is content that's perfect for a book. What was it that prompted you to suddenly do that? Because you hadn't for a while.
Yeah, so I started sharing the story in 2016. So now going back 10 years, the FBI invited me to speak about my case at with their rookie agents in New York City. And when they called me, it's always a restricted number. And I thought, what did I do now? And my wife Sue said, what happened? Were you downloading illegal music? What now? I said, you know what? Let's see what they have to say. And they said, could you come speak to our rookie agents? Because we're building new cases. We're seeing this behavior again in the industry. And so I spoke there, and that led to the speaking, training sort of second career. And that was, going back 10 years. Wiley Publishing, as I mentioned, just sort of reached out to me in 2024 saying, we hear about your sort of name at these conferences, but we understand you don't have a book. Have you thought about that? And I had thought about that, but I was also much more comfortable telling the story in a boardroom or at a conference where it kind of stays there. And I was not as comfortable potentially, putting it all on the page and getting it out there for consumption in the world. So there was something about maybe my ego or something about this that I like being in the room. I like engaging the crowds. I like making people think about their own slippery slopes and pressures, but I wasn't sure about putting it out there in the world because there's going to be 1-star reviews. Somebody's going to say, oh, this guy is making money off this crime, 1 star. And now I know that's going to happen, and I'm okay with that. And I can't control what other people are going to say or think about it. And also my children, my daughters are, I thought, old enough where they can really appreciate the story. Now they're both teenagers. And so it's going to be out there in the world. People are going to know about it. But I thought that they were at a point where this was a good time in their life for it to be out there because it will come back and People ask them about it at some point in school. And so I just thought it was a good time to really get it out there. And we're seeing sort of this classic slippery slope behavior everywhere. I mean, there was in the US a few months ago, there was an NBA player who rationalized gambling on a game he was playing in, and he made $200,000 on the gamble, on the bet, and he makes $300,000 per half of every NBA game. He just threw away his career as a young man, is looking at prison time. So this sort of slope of the rationalizations are still out there in the world. And so I thought, why not put my story to the page and get it out there and try to highlight these risks for people, everywhere.
And obviously one of the benefits of having waited is that you've got the experience of telling the story, your experience of sharing the story, what happened. So it's not just the bits prior to going to trial, it's your experience after that. And you can tell a lot more of a story. So in some respects, you're bringing the benefit of hindsight. And I don't mean in terms of polishing the story, because you certainly don't do that. But you've got the benefit of hindsight of the experience of telling your story and the experience of really reflecting on what you did.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sort of 9 years into doing this, if I wrote the book in 2016 after that first FBI presentation, I wouldn't have any context on the behavioral side, or like, why do we make these decisions? What does it look like? What is the fraud triangle, the opportunity, the pressures, the rationalizations? Like, I didn't really have any context for that. I just had my story, and then being invited as a guest speaker during compliance training, as I've been doing, I hear other stories from clients, other close calls, other near misses. And then I start to sort of, figure out, okay, this is how it happens in this industry or that industry. And so now putting this on the page, I have much more sort of context for how that happens. And so I've, some of my new insights in the book that were not really in my presentations were something that I call the integrity gap, the distance between our reputation, what people think we are, and what we actually are, our character. And I kind of came up with that idea as I remember sharing with you one time, I got this reputation. I get these reputation management emails all the time now from AI chatbots. Mr. Hardin, we found something terrible about you online, which is my case. I'm sure for a certain not, inexpensive price, they will remove it for me. And I play along with it now. I say, oh my goodness, have you checked out tipperx.com, my website? Like, all the bad stuff is right here. And so then they stop emailing me. So I figured, why not just own it? And so that's the integrity gap, is a new thing in the book I'll be talking about now when it's out.
To do your presentations as effectively as you do, but also to write the book, you really had to think about what happened and really reflect on that and come to terms with it and understand your decision making in a way that I think most of us, most decisions that we make, we can kind of handle. This is something you have really had to get to grips with. And so there's a lot in the book, I think, very reflective, really looking back on your background, your upbringing, your desires, what drove you as a human. I guess you've really had to understand yourself in order to write the book.
I did. And even going back, starting as all books do at childhood, there's, young Tom growing up in the Southern US, the 80s and 90s. My parents, as I write, were just really hard workers, middle-class American family you could picture. My father, spending his career at the same company when people used to do that back in that generation for his whole career, Coca-Cola. And my mother running a childcare business at our home. So you could just picture chaos at the house with 10 little kids running around. She's got the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches all lined up, military style. Okay, here you go, nap time, running that. But I remember, just sort of drawing a picture for the reader, just seeing my mother's worn down sneakers by the door just from a hectic day. And my father dealing with traffic in the Atlanta area at that time, coming home exhausted, but just trying to work hard only so myself and my two brothers, could eventually have a better life, like any parent would want for their child. And so that really instilled in me, I think, some kind of need to be able to succeed and to prove to them that their sacrifices were something that I didn't take for granted, and I was going to do, better. And so try to figure that out. Good student. When I was 8, where my dad, it was a big sacrifice that he bought the encyclopedias from the World Book Company for us. And younger listeners may not know what the encyclopedias are, but it was 75 pounds, or it was 35 kilos of books. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, it's 75 pounds of homework. And then they were sitting on the bookshelf, and I started with A. I said, let's just start reading. So it was Aachen, Aachen, which I think is a city. And 2 years later, I got the Zygote, Zygote. And I couldn't really place it in the book. Why did I do that? And I just thought, well, it seemed like a mountain to climb, and there was a very famous mountaineer. Why'd you climb that mountain? Because it was there, and just sort of, it was a challenge. And then it sort of transpired into applying to colleges, applying to the top school, doing whatever it took. So I thought, I'm just going to have this sort of sense of hardworking, willing outcomes into existence, whatever it takes.
And I think it all points towards you've thought long and hard about, and you've had time to do that as well. But you've thought long and hard about lots of examples of decisions that you've made in your life. And you bring those out in the book. And what I thought was fascinating, it's not that you're necessarily pinning it and saying there was an inevitability to what happened, but there was a pattern there that you started to detect. And you've really got a handle on yourself and what motivated you. I thought that was a really interesting exercise. And I wondered whether, as you were writing the book, you said a lot of these things before, some of the things you haven't said before, but the exercise of writing down, presumably also got you to think about these things.
Oh, it did. And it went way beyond, because I had sort of my standard keynote that I had been doing for the 9 years prior. If you were to download a 45-minute keynote, it's probably 5,000 or 6,000 words. And so I thought that was the whole story. And then the publishing contract said, no, we'd like 82,000 words, a 277-page memoir. So that's going to take more than just downloading my transcript and putting that on the page. And so as I went through peeling back the layers of the onion, really always sort of perceiving myself as an outsider. Like I came from Georgia, went to this Ivy League college. So I'm surrounded by people who were the top of their prep school classes. And I tell myself, I don't fit in. I'm Tom from Georgia. I'm the outsider. I'm going to show these people, and got my first C on an exam, and I'm going to have to work harder. Then got an A+ in the toughest class in this Ivy League school. Now I've arrived, and then I get the investment banking internship, but not at the top investment bank. They told me no, but another investment bank told me yes, but that just wasn't enough. And so I kept sort of, as a young man, ratcheting up my expectations. Once I got to one level, I wanted the next level. And I didn't ever take time, now looking back as an older man, looking at my younger self, and thought, why didn't at some point I just become happy with where I was, what I had? I was such a tremendous spot in my career, a lot of success, but it was always looking for the next group I wasn't a part of, or the next feeling of maybe some insecurity or not belonging, that sense of like not having status once it really got to a point, in the hedge fund industry where I blew myself up.
You're very careful not to do this because you take responsibility for your decisions you made. But it struck me that the environments in which you were working and studying, and I'm thinking less about your family life and more about the career and the sort of academic pressures.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, there are environments there that, I'm not blaming the environments entirely, but they don't help. They can bring out the worst in people. And as I was reading it, I thought a lot of these high pressure environments, particularly financial services,
Right.
you can sort of see how that's a fertile ground, if you like, for the sorts of things that you talk about to happen.
Yeah. And I think if listeners are familiar, there's something called the fraud triangle. So when somebody crosses a line, there's a need. So maybe there's a need for always performance, or to put up some type of performance in the role. Rationalization is a big one, which I talk about in the book. But the opportunity is also, I think, just higher in financial services, because we can just change numbers on a spreadsheet, and then we've actually maybe done something we shouldn't, versus working at a manufacturing company where maybe you'd have to go through, many more steps to do something that's going to harm the company. And so I even remember going back and thinking about I spent a few months as an investment banker, as an analyst. And when I got there in 1999 at the investment bank, it was the dot-com boom and the bubble. And we were taking tech companies public, and, we'd have the deal team huddle ups, and the managing director tells me, the analyst, what we're trying to do is dress this up and make it look as good as possible, because our loyalty is to the company. It's okay. Our loyalty is not to GAAP accounting, or our loyalty is not to the public. Our loyalty is to our client, and to make their numbers look as good as possible. And so I remember one financial model, not to bore people with financial modeling stories, but one financial model, I was trying to make adjusted EBITDA look as good as it could for our company, because we're going to take it public as a multiple off that number. And EBITDA is one thing. It's kind of squishy. You can make things up. But adjusted EBITDA, I was talking to my editor, and he actually wrote this for me. He said, well, you're changing like a 200-car pileup into a Disney parade. That's actually what I'm trying to do for this client. And so I put that there for the book. Like, now the number looks really good. I take it into the VP at the bank. The VP loves it. Thanks for getting to this number. And the managing director is like, all right, this is great. Thanks for updating the model. And I remember I wrote in the book, it sort of felt like sand in my teeth. Like, well, I kind of just did what you wanted, but hey, I'm not gonna speak up, or I'm not gonna say what we're doing is a little bit unethical. I'm just gonna keep doing this because this is how it's done. And that's what the environment was in banking before the hedge funds.
Look, just to reassure you, as I was reading it, one of the things I found is looking back on some of the things I was asked stroke told to do, and similar sorts of things. We need to have a league table where we are in the top three, because otherwise we're not going to get this business. How do we get a league table to put us in the top three? Well, the answer is we do a chart of IPOs on a Tuesday or something, right? You cut the cake to get the story that you want.
Yeah.
It was disclosed, but in very, very small print.
Right.
But I think that rationalization,
Yeah.
I totally recognized in slightly different contexts, and I never quite went as far as what you were describing, but I found myself thinking I could see how that could happen. I think one of the wonderful things in the book is it's very much your story and it's colored by your experiences. But I think there are lots of things there where I saw myself going, yeah, there, but for the grace of God. There are so many instances where when you really do pick out these basic human dynamics. We've all been under pressure and cut corners. We've all broken laws of some kind. So I get one of the things it struck me as I was reading those things, it must have been quite challenging for you, because you're going back and I guess churning up memories, and there may be things that you had either conveniently forgotten or genuinely forgotten that sort of point to this, but you're having to go through and think about those things because they're relevant to the exercise.
Yeah, and I went back. Some people were very kind to me that extended me their time that were early in my career to talk to them and sort of interview people for the book, because I have to write this 277-page book, so it's not just going to be me coming out of my head. That would just take. I probably wouldn't get to the word count. So it's like I have to interview people early in my career. And there was a woman way back in my investment banking days who I caught up with. She'd remember when we were at that restaurant together in Los Angeles having dinner, and we thought it would be funny to jump the check. And so I said, I don't remember that. She's like, no, we were eating dinner. We had a couple drinks. She pulled the car around, we're 20-year-old interns. And we went and jumped in the car and left, and we were laughing, like sticking it to the man. And as I was writing it as an adult, I'm like, well, all I was sticking it to was a waitress just trying to make rent. And I didn't pay the check. But that was also like, okay, I got away with that. But that's kind of where it starts. Like you skip a check when you're 20 years old at a restaurant. Oh, it's funny. No, it's not. And then it gets to investment banking. But it's all those little things through my life. So there was a lot more situations as I was writing the book that I found myself in where I actually cut corners here, cut corners there. And we all have that if we're really introspective, but actually putting on the page, I'm comfortable talking about the insider trading the last 9 years, but I was like, should I put the story in here of 20-year-old Tom skipping a check? That makes me sound like that's, it's not a federal crime, but still that was like, but there is a pattern. Then here's a pattern here of me not being caught and me doing these things. And, I think it's just really relatable to people. We all in our lives, to your point, have those places where we can go left or right and make those decisions.
Well, I've said this to you before. You're in a very remarkable position of having told your story more times, I suspect, than most of us ever get to tell our stories. But a lot of what's in the book is obviously, it's not fresh to you because you experienced it, but fresh chapters and a fresh experience. Was it different to go back over some of these older things than it has been to tell the story that you've been telling for best part of a decade?
Yeah, it was a little bit different. I guess just getting into more details in terms of how I got to where I was in my hedge fund career. And at that point, looking at my younger self and just sort of, as I mentioned before, oh my gosh, there's actually a theme here of me, in high school or in my 20s, not really feeling like I belong, whether that was in college or once I got to the hedge fund industry, there was this illicit in-group who was trading on inside information. I wasn't part of that group. And I remember there was certain, I wrote in the book, like information mafias, usually based on ethnic groups. There was a Chinese mafia that would fly to Taiwan and get information on semiconductors. There was a Irish mafia out of Boston. There was an Indian mafia. And I remember thinking, well, I'm not part of any of these mafias. And I wrote in the book, but I'm trying to look through the clubhouse window to get the secret handshake. I'm definitely interested in what they're doing because I know I don't have that status. So that was just sort of an aha theme for me. Like, oh, I'm actually putting some of these themes together through my life that actually gave me a new insight as to why I crossed the line. Whereas in my corporate talks, I rationalized it, which is true, but there was more of a foundation that I didn't really understand until I had to put the words down for every chapter and go back and edit it and figure out, okay, what is the theme here? So there was a lot more reflections. And to your point, I feel like I've analyzed myself more than maybe anybody in the world, but putting it on the page, there was actually more insights I came up with that I hadn't thought about, had I not talked to these other people in my life that I hadn't talked to in a long time and said, oh, not that the signs were there, but that they were like through life. Yeah.
Writing a book is not easy. And anybody that tells you otherwise has either used ChatGPT to do the whole thing, right? And those definitely exist, or has never done it. Did you enjoy the process or was it hard work? Because I could imagine on the one hand, you are uncovering a backstory. So there's bits of it, there's bits, there's things that, so you're helping to make sense of things. On the other hand, it's hard work to put these things down. It's hard work to decide. So it's quite a cognitively challenging exercise. How did you find it?
It is. And when the publisher reached out, you should write a book. I said, oh my gosh, I'm not a writer, I'm a speaker. And they said, well, why don't you look at maybe finding a coach that could just talk to you and kind of just help you with that. So I had a great coach, and I don't think I would have gotten to the word count without the coach just talking to me for a few hours, recording the conversations and going back to about like, how do we lay it out? How do we look at the themes? He sort of pointed out this theme of not feeling like I belong, which I didn't see because sometimes you can't see it yourself until you're talking to somebody and he's not in finance, he's a writer, but he really helped me lay it out. Sort of like, how do we open it? How do we tell the story throughout? So that was helpful to have, in a sense, sort of a writing partner, more of an editor, but just helping me out, helping me get on the page and uncover more of those themes that I wouldn't see if I was just sort of, if it was just sort of coming out of my head on the page and then I bring in an editor to cut it back. I wouldn't have had all those insights had I not been talking to somebody else through this. And so that was really helpful for me in the early drafts of getting this manuscript written and written and written. And then eventually, which was great, was I had too many words, like 82,000 words. I've never written something longer than a blog post. And then the word count and words said 96,000 words. And so then the editor actually cut all the funny childhood stories out. I'm like, these are great stories. It's like, no, this doesn't actually add to the themes. I'm like, all right, somebody has to kill the babies, right? It couldn't be me. So there was more funny childhood stories that are probably funny to me and a couple of my friends, but it didn't really serve purpose in the book. So that was good to be able to cut the fat.
The exercise of writing the book is obviously you do it, you submit it, and it gets locked down far earlier than I think people who haven't written books realize. That thought process that you've started must still be ongoing. You are presumably still reflecting on these things, because one of the things I love about your keynotes and your sessions is that you bring freshness to it, right? This isn't somebody turning up and sort of going, I was famous once. Here's, rinse and repeat type stuff, which would be a very easy thing to do. And I'm sure there'd be an audience for that. But you're evolving and you're thinking and you're bringing fresh ideas and you're looking at the world around you. So presumably the contents of the book, I presume additional threads are occurring, new things. You've unleashed something, I guess, in yourself as part of that exercise.
I have, and I already think I have some material for my second book, just to your point, because I turned it in August of 2025. And then the next week, there's more, for an example, like congressional single stock trading is a problem in the US. And I mentioned that very softly in the book, just to tie it into a theme today that I was seeing. And, I could have another chapter on just what's has happened since August to today, 2026. And yeah, you see, right, because it's interesting, the book is just set. And I know you've said this before about your book, like you wish you could add more to it because so many more things happen, so many more insights come from it. And now I'm starting to jot those down, a little bit of a journal on my laptop. And I think once this book is out, I'm going to have the other book just sort of as a follow on to this book of things that I wish were in there that were not, sort of tying it into the world today. And so that's one of the op-eds I've been pitching is how do we get the US Congress people to stop trading individual stocks? And that's just an example of a topic that I'm always asked about. Well, Tom, they got you for these 4 trades. What about XYZ congressperson? I'll say, well, who writes the laws in the US? Okay. Are they going to get rid of this law? Like, okay, that's why it's not happening. But really, there's been 25 bills proposed by the House in the US. So the way the US civics lessons that starts in the House, the Senate, president's desk, 25 bills have actually never made it to the president's desk in the last 12 years, because a lot of these bills have sort of parts of the bill where if you run for Congress and you're an individual business person, a successful business person, you would actually have to sell the equity of your private company, which is very hard to do. So we're not going to incentivize as many successful business people, which I like in the government more than career politicians, to run because of this stipulation. But it's putting these bills to kill the bill purposely. So I have an op-ed, maybe by the time we release this episode, it'll be out there in the world. Like, how do we actually write a bill? This is Tipper X, telling you how to do it. So things like that, just jumping off points from the story that I could see, having a long tail in terms of discussions.
As you hold a mirror up to yourself, have you found yourself thinking about alternative, I guess, the parallel universe? Ask that, not in this, of course, you wish you hadn't done the big stuff, but as one looks at it, there's part of the human existence is making mistakes and sort of having to accept that we will not get things 100% correct and we will get things wrong. And so I wondered, as you look back on your past, particularly through the lens of where I might not have made the best possible decision, how much are you sitting back and sort of thinking, well, I'm human like everybody else? And how much are you kind of thinking about that parallel universe that you perhaps wish had happened?
Yeah, it's interesting because I share in the book my career to my own detriment was stopped at 29 years old, and so I speak at a college every year in the U.S. and the professor, for the benefit of the students, writes down, okay, this would have been Tom's potential career earnings of the 15-year hedge fund career, and it's a very big number. And I'm like, do we have to do this every time I speak to your class? He's like, yes, it's very important for the students to see what you gave up because people that aren't familiar with my story, I made 4 trades at a hedge fund, and me personally on those trades made $46,000. So in my keynote, that's always a big slide with the drum roll. What do you think I made? Sometimes I'll ask the audience, 10 million. 10 million. That's a bad person would make 10 million. $46,000 is what I made. And so this professor shows the students, Tom, he gets to like an 8-figure number that's pretty big, which may be true. And so that's kind of the parallel universe of what would have happened. Like obviously a much better financial situation I would have been in than I am now, but really writing the book, interviewing my wife, which was pretty surreal, talking to her in 2025, 17 years later, what was it like for her? And then seeing that my kids are old enough now too, I kind of ended the book in a way that, and not to glamorize what I did, but sort of like I didn't get the life that I had planned for. A young Tom, always overachieving, always, not being satisfied, more. But I kind of got something better in a way because this happened when I was young. The FBI gave me a chance to clean up the industry, and then they told me that I should go talk about it. So I look out, one of the most important books I read during my sort of trials and tribulations of being sentenced to speaking about it was The Road to Character by the New York Times columnist David Brooks. And it's a wonderful book. He talks about resume virtues versus eulogy virtues. And resume virtues as a young man is all I was focused on. And we all have to be in our careers focused on our resume virtues. I always see, LinkedIn friends getting new jobs. Congratulations, you're working your way up. But also, are we thinking about our eulogy virtues? Like literally, when we all leave one way, what are people going to talk about at our eulogy? Is it going to be 29-year-old Tom? Okay, he traded Kronos, he traded Hilton, he did all this stuff. Or hey, that happened, but look what he did, whatever many years it was, it ends up being from you doing this. Look what he did at that point. Like, and so that's really important to me, just sort of, whenever I move on, just having the balance or, more of an emphasis on those eulogy virtues. But again, probably wouldn't have been something that if I wrote the book 10 years ago, that I really, really picked up on. Because 10 years ago, I was still in a pretty bad shame spiral. Like shame is, I'm a terrible person, did a bad thing. Guilt is, maybe as a young guy, I got caught up in this situation that I should have seen, but didn't see, I made these trades I shouldn't have, but I'm still like a regular person. And I've leaned more into the guilt and the shame because the shame doesn't help people. But also I realized looking back at my younger self, I kind of am still in many ways like Tom from Georgia, just sort of like I'm the same personality as I was. So things have changed in terms of what I weight now in my life in terms of importance. I don't care about status. I don't care what car the neighbor has or what school their kids are in. I could care less. Like a lot of people care about that stuff, but it's more about just the actual character of myself. And like now that I have children, you can only do so much for your kids. You can kind of, they don't want to hear, from dad. So you got to sort of say the opposite of what you want them to do. They'll do that. But just sort of thinking about legacy and impact. And that's sort of where I am now. And the book helped a lot with that. I don't think I would have had this reflection if I hadn't spent the process writing the book.
One of the things that came across in the writing, and again made me reflect about my own career, is the acting that one has to do. You go to work and you are required to do things that perhaps you wouldn't do if you had a choice. We almost have to put on a slightly different persona. And it strikes me that what you've built from your situation is very much a sustainable business in the sense of it's not sustainable because you're the only one that can tell the story, but it's sustainable in the sense of it's you being you. And so if we looked at sort of authenticity as a value, and you mentioned, for example, LinkedIn posts, and we've all seen them where sort of humble brags or whatever, it strikes me that you've really found yourself, and without wishing to get too sort of silly, that what you're able to just be you. You're showing up at work, whatever that means, because you do lots of different things. You're showing up at work as you. And so it struck me that you found that in many, back to you found something better, is you are genuinely able to be you because you've put it all out there, right? There's nothing that can sort of like, there's no secrets because you'd have put them in the book. So one of the things you can sort of walk around knowing that you're being true to yourself, which is something that not many people can.
Yeah, that's really freeing in some regard where I don't have to, for years between when I write the book, I was a stay-at-home dad going through some depression, I'd say, got heavy, started running to deal with that. But I was always trying to not talk about it, people would say, "What did you do before you were a stay-at-home dad?" "Oh, I worked on Wall Street, but don't Google me." I say in the book, it's never a good idea if you have to tell people not to Google yourself. It's probably not good. So there was always that.
Because what are they going to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. What listeners, write this down. Take away. If you have to say, "Don't Google me," that's probably not good. But it was always worry, like, is the neighbor going to find out about my story, or when I'm taking the girls to whatever we were doing when they were younger, somebody going to find out, or is one of my wife's colleagues going to find out about this? And then now, as I was saying, I sort of find it funny when I get these reputation cleanup emails. We can clean all this. Don't take all the bad stuff off of me. This is my business. This is my business now, talking about this and making people aware and really owning it. And as I said, when the book comes out, I know there's going to be 1-star reviews. People don't, there's going to be a certain amount of people that read the book or just don't like the idea. And I can't worry about that. Like, that's not who I'm talking to. I know when we all give our presentations, a certain amount of people aren't going to like it anyway, but I'm not writing the book for them. It's more for, you said, being authentic. And the book has also allowed me just to write more this year on sort of just a little newsletter I have. And just like, here are the insights that I might have around this topic that when you read what I write, you'll just be like, oh yeah, Tom definitely, that's like a Tipper X insight. That's not something that's, off the walls or a company or something. This is actually my lived experience. And now, 9 years into sharing the story and engaging with companies, also what I'm seeing out there. One of the things that's come up is sometimes I'll speak at a company, and this wasn't in the book, but they ask, and you probably do this too, like, I'll review the code of conduct for companies before I speak, and because they want to tie that in. It's code of conduct training, compliance training sometimes. But so many of these code of conducts have that section, ask yourself these 10 questions if you're ever at that line. And sometimes it's philosophical, and I'm going to be a terrible code of conduct consultant because I want to rip all these things up. And actually, I could probably save companies money. Just put this one question in there. If you make that decision, are you willing to be held accountable for this decision at the end of the day? We don't have to run through 100 hypothetical situations in your code of conduct. That's the one thing. I don't know if there's an industry for a one-page code of conduct, but that's where,
Let's find out.
That's where I'd lead.
But that freedom to speak as yourself, I think is a tremendous, and again, you're very careful not to underplay what happened, but it's a little bit of a gift to you in the sense that you can take that and now be yourself. And for example, you were talking about Congress people trading single stocks, or you're able to comment on a much broader range of topics than just purely financial services. That's an example of something where you the specialist knowledge, but you've got a level of insight and a level of willingness to confront things that I think is incredibly powerful. And that allows you, I think, a different perspective to many people because you've spent time thinking about this stuff in a way that most of us haven't. And so as you look at the world, I mean, it seems to me that the topics you talk about, it's relevant. The book is about one man and financial services and what happened. But these decisions are happening all over the place in different contexts. It gives you, I think, a lens on a topic that's relevant to all of us that the rest of us just can't have because we haven't been through what you've been through.
Yeah. And I think we all, as I said in the book, we all make mistakes. We all make bad decisions, but we have to understand the difference. That was one of my earlier talks at a law school in the States. I wrote, the FBI said I should go share this story. And so I went on sort of a pilgrimage, emailing colleges in the New York area. Could I come speak for free to your students? And it's amazing how many people said no to I'm not charging for a presentation. I'll drive there. I'll fly there. I'll talk to the students. They didn't want me. And then one law school was kind enough to reply and then not go through administration just to bring me to talk to the students. And I kept using the word mistakes. I made mistakes. And when I was driving home, I wrote, actually, I realized I made bad decisions. And it made myself feel better by calling my bad decisions mistakes because I didn't really have to own them. So I was on stage at this law school feeling like I was owning my mistakes, but then I wasn't owning my bad decisions. And that came back to me. I was speaking at a large private equity company 2 years ago, and one of the managing partners was interviewing me, fireside chat. And he's like, sort of as a passing comment at the end, Tom, you made some mistakes and paid for it. I'm like, I don't know if this is the right thing to do. I'm going to correct like the main person at this firm. I didn't make mistakes or I made bad decisions. And then the whole place just started coming up and actually confessing their own innocuous mistakes to compliance because they just realized that was an aha moment that, again, I'd never seen written anywhere. It just sort of came to me through this lived experience, just sort of going through the fire, coming out the other side. And what did I learn? And how could this be helpful for not just companies, but for people, for my kids, for anybody?
Have you found now a greater willingness to talk about things? And Dennis already go into detail, but it struck me that You've crossed that threshold of where the biggest stories and the biggest challenges are out there. Does that make life easier in general?
I think it does. I think sometimes I'm concerned that will the story still have relevance if, not to get too existential, but if the moral fabric of society, like what we see today, is sort of not something that would be acceptable 10 years ago or 15 years ago, that, I wonder if somebody's going to read this story and like, why is this guy beating himself up over 4 small trades in 2007? Look what's happening today. And there's some risk. Okay, maybe I have to update the story. I'm not going to commit more crimes.
I need to refresh my
to
backstory.
be more relevant, but just sort of like, I need a refresher. So don't worry, I'm not going to be going there. But I wonder, will the world change enough where the story, like the slippery slope, doesn't have relevance because so many other crazy things are happening? And I guess that's one thought I have. Will the phone stop ringing one day because people say, well, nobody really thinks what you did is bad or worthy of, all this guilt because look at what's happening today. And okay, we could all say that about anything. But also I think, and like just sort of having your own company and being able to talk and talk about things that you might not be able to talk about if you were working for a company is also freeing. And so I always try to find sort of insights I could have that aren't being talked about that maybe somebody working at a big company couldn't talk about because there's whatever risks that, hey, I've already gone, all my sort of bad laundry's out there, right? So I can, hopefully not hurt my reputation again, but just sort of like, this is how I see these things happening. And these are the insights I have because I went what I went through.
That encumbrance that people often have working in larger organizations, and we see this with what people are willing to share on LinkedIn, or even their willingness to be, the ability to use it, even liking posts can be problematic for some people. You've got that freedom. I love the fact that you're using that voice and to explore topics through your own lens. And I think that, for me, it seems is a real superpower. And I guess writing the book has probably helped with that because you've had to explore far more of your own story. You were focused very much on a set of decisions at a particular point in your life. You've now gone back and filled in and thought about a whole load of other ones. So you're used to kind of applying that lens to yourself. And now I think you've crafted that. Writing the book has helped you to find your voice. I've loved watching your blog posts emerge over time. You're building authority through not sort of studying this thing, but actually, well, I guess you are. You're studying yourself and you're thinking about the science behind it, and the psychology behind it, and the experience of it, and talking to other people. But it's very much real world research.
Yeah, it's more, I guess I would say I'm an anecdotalist, sort of just from my own story or company engagements and things that happen. So I'm not an empiricist, not doing research as somebody might be doing, which is not to say I couldn't be doing that, but that's just sort of like, I have a story, have a client engagement, an insight comes to me, and I would just write it down, and this is what I'm seeing, and it's very freeing to be able to just do that. And it's really interesting to me. Like at this point, I wonder if I one day will wake up and say, what's on my calendar this week? I'm really tired about talking about myself. So how might this evolve? If I go another 10 years sharing the story, will it be, some of the crazy stories people have heard me tell, wearing a wire to a swimming pool, which is in the book. Definitely wait for that right in the middle of the book. Will I still be telling that story? Will it be something else? And I think it'll probably, evolve over time because I don't want to just live off the one story, the Come On Eileen of the Dexys, Midnight Runners. I think they're called, where it is the Come On Eileen. We have the extended version, we have the acoustic. So there is something there that people want to see. If I'm talking about something completely different, somebody would yell, where's the Come On Eileen? Where's the wearing a wire through the, in the swimming pool? So come back to the greatest hits, but not living off the greatest hits, because then I'm not really growing as a person. And I still, and I'm not only Tipper X, I'm also Tom. And I'm still, I think I still have plenty to give. And, just not living off the one story is important to me to continue to evolve and just to figure out what are the insights, where do things click for people. And so that's just something professionally that I'm interested in today in this profession. And yes, I happen to have a story that led me to here, but I think I would have been interested in decision-making, why we make these decisions, had this not happened to me.
So, Tom, I guess, we've talked a lot about your story, but there's somebody else that played a major role in this. Who, I guess the book is really the first time that many people will have heard the voice of Sue, your wife. And she's very kindly agreed to come onto the show. How is the experience of you hearing from her, talking about her experiences? Because obviously you know what you went through, but at the time you were understandably focused on yourself. How was the experience of talking to her about things?
Well, it's pretty surreal. Writing the book in 2025 of events that happened, years before. And then realizing again that I had this 82,000 word sentence, like so much for me. How am I going to fill it out? And so I said, okay, I'm going to have to interview all these people. And then one day it dawned on me, I should probably be interviewing my wife, how she got through this. And so the middle of many parts of the book are me recounting my interactions with my wife and how she got through it. And so I waited till 2025 to say, what was it like for you going through this 2008, 2009, 2010, over a decade before? And I remember my very first interview with her as my subject, she said, "Thank you for asking, because you never did." And I was like, wow, you're right. So she's here now to have more of her, add more of her perspective.
So thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a pleasure. We've had Tom on a few times before. It's really lovely to see you on the show. I guess the start point to all of this is really to say, when you found out, when he told you on that fateful evening, or you took you out for dinner, what was going through your mind?
Well, so it all started. I don't know how much Tom has already went into that fateful night, but we had just gotten home from work a Friday night, our normal tradition of having drinks before we headed out to dinner, sort of decompressing from the week. And we were in our living room on our couch and just had mixed our drinks. And he said, "I have something to tell you." And, your mind doesn't go to insider trading or the FBI approaching you, that nothing happened. I went, "Oh gosh, he lost his job, or there's, some affair going on, something," because I knew all week long, I knew something was off. He was just not acting like himself. He was very just in a constant state of stress. I didn't know what it was. And I kept asking, "Are you okay?" And he kept brushing it off. "I'm fine. Just haven't been sleeping well." And so when he told me everything and laid it all out, I just was in disbelief. I really had no idea any of this was happening. Just I really had no idea. And I didn't know, it was hard to process it all. And what is this going to mean for our future together? What does this mean for our future family, for his career? We had plans. I had plans in my head for what kind of house we were going to buy, how we were going to raise our kids, where we were going to be able to live, because we were both doing pretty well in our careers at that point. And all of that, knowing that that wouldn't be the case was, it takes a lot. It's a lot to digest. So we went out to dinner, and we just, after that, took it day by day. And I think it was helpful for Tom to have someone to confide in. And I was happy to be there for him for that.
I mean, statistically, relationships tend not to survive under these circumstances. And I know that your faith is very, very important to you. That clearly played a key role in, I guess, supporting both of you, but probably holding the marriage together.
Right. Yes. Absolutely. I've been a churchgoer since birth, and I strongly believe in faith, and it's been in my life, in my entire life. And it meant a lot for me, for Tom to come into the Catholic faith as well. And I think that held us together. But I think at the root of everything, and what, still to this day, is that I know my husband is a good person, and no one is perfect. There is not one person on this planet who is perfect. So, again, he owned it. He didn't say, "I made a mistake." He said, "I made bad decisions," and he owned it. And he decided this isn't, for a while, I think, he went into pretty bad depression and figuring out his life. What is he going to do? But then he decided, "I'm going to own this, and I'm going to figure out a way to move forward." And I'm so proud of him for everything he's accomplished and everything he's done.
Talk a little bit about the pressures that you're under, because we've heard a lot about the pressures that Tom was under, obviously, and it's being stopped by the FBI in the street and suddenly put into a different career than the one you thought you'd had is, of course, a surprise for anyone. But you're having to keep a secret that is
Right.
relatively fresh to you. How did you find that whole experience of sort of being, I guess there's relief of being inside, knowing what's going on, but on the other hand, it's not
Right.
your story to keep secret, and there must have been really interesting pressures on you.
Yeah, there, especially after the time that he got laid off and he hadn't gotten a new job, a lot of our friends were asking, "Why isn't Tom working? What's going on there? Why can't he find a job?" My parents were asking that. And, it was, he couldn't really explain it by saying, "Well, there's a reason he's part of this insider trading scandal network, and he's been approached by the FBI, he's wearing wire. Like, I couldn't say that to anyone. So, I had to tell white lies here and there and just say, well, he's trying to get a job, he just can't find one. Again, the timing sort of worked for the story since it was early '09. So this is after the whole financial crisis. But it was hard to not tell friends and family. Um, and then, I mean, you might go into this further, but when we eventually had to start telling people, that's a whole new thing. It was almost easier to keep a secret than to have to go through the entire story again and again and again, and people just not believing it, because Tom is kind of the last person you would think would be in something like this. And that's sort of the reaction we got from most of our friends and family.
Tom talks in the book about, he's talked to me before about not finding it necessarily easy, because I don't think this is ever easy, but sort of getting used to it and working out how to handle this. I presume you're going through similar things where there's the shock, then I have to navigate this new world. I presume you're working out. So when we talked about white lies, for example, I presume you start to have scripts in your head about how to manage this, a routine for handling it.
Right. A little bit. And then it's hard. It's hard because it depends who the person is. Everyone has a ton of questions. And so, especially with the book coming out now, I was talking to Tom the other day, I kind of forget who knows and who doesn't know because it's been so long. But I forget that there are so many people who don't know. Just people all of our close friends know his story and everything. And it's not like he's trying to hide. He's out in public speaking about it. But it's not something that comes up casually in dinner conversation with people that maybe you're not that close with, but you just come in, just interact with on a fairly regular basis. So to have to go through sort of this whole process again, I don't know. I mean, I'm looking forward to it in a way for Tom to get out there and really for everyone to know his story. But it's a lot, and it's a lot of questions and a lot of explaining to do to people. But I'm excited for his story out there and for him to teach, have people learn about his story and just how he's overcome it and come back from that.
Talk a little bit about what it was like when the news came out and suddenly the secret is out, I guess. So on the one hand, I suppose
Right.
relief. On the other hand, particularly given you're working in the same industry, that's got to add a
Right.
whole layer of complexity that nobody's going to be prepared for.
Right. That was probably one of the most difficult times, other than probably his sentencing day, when I didn't know if he would go to prison. But when the news came out, that was very difficult for me. I felt, even though I had no part in it, I thought, okay, are people going to think that I knew about this, that I was involved in it? Would, it come back to haunt me? Would people from my work from Lehman Brothers and from Scout Capital, would they sort of say, well, can't do business with you knowing that what your husband did? I didn't know if I would lose my job. And at that time, I was the sole breadwinner. So I needed my job. And it was, the only thing that we had financially to keep us afloat. So I was very worried when the news broke. Thankfully, for the most part, not 100%. We've lost a few friends along the way from all this and a few colleagues. But for most part, all of our friends and family have been nothing but supportive, and just along the way, nothing but support. So that says a lot about Tom and his character, and that people wouldn't abandon him and would stick by him.
You mentioned sentencing. I know that one of the interesting facts is you decided you wanted to be there, and Tom tried to, for understandable reasons,
Yeah.
thought that wasn't a good idea, but you were determined to be there. Talk to us a little bit about that thought process and the experience of it.
Right. I think he was trying to save me from potentially bad news, and not knowing what was going to happen. But it never even crossed my mind that I wouldn't be there. I scheduled the date long in advance, had my parents watch our girls, and I was going to be there for him, because that's probably, I would think, one of the most nerve-wracking days of your entire life. And you need someone there. You can't be there by yourself, no matter what would happen. I was there to support him. I mean, we had to have realistic conversations about what would happen if you do have to go to jail. Like how would this work? So we had to talk about that leading up to it. And thank God it all, you know, worked out in the end and that he got time served and was able to sort of start fresh from that point forward. And it was a long time. That was the hard part too, that it just took so long. There was so much uncertainty in our life from when the news broke, when he was officially convicted, or not convicted, but pled guilty. There was so much time between that and the sentencing. And to be in limbo for that long is just impossible, that you can't move forward. So there was a lot of stress, not only that, and then having young kids, a new house. There was a lot of stressors in our life. So thank God everything worked out, and then he could move forward from that point on.
And I will say Sue was so supportive for me as a stay-at-home dad. Just I remember she would say, just be the best stay-at-home dad you can be. You can't be anything else. And my job for many years was just, picking up everything from the kitchen table to the door, right? That was my job. And then to cook some food, and that's all I could control. That's all I could focus on. She was very understanding, that in her current circumstance at the time, this is all I could do, just being a father, which I don't think many spouses would be that understanding. So I was lucky.
And I guess one of the challenging things, this is brought out in the book, is Tom's reaction to the situation. And you're having to watch somebody who is struggling with something like, we would all obviously struggle with. So it's not only that you've got this stressful situation there, but you can see there's a risk of your partner in life spiraling out of control. How did you find the strength to just get through that? Because I could, all of these things point towards a heck of a lot of pressure and stress on you.
Absolutely. I think it was just taking one day at a time, especially when you have little kids. At least I feel like that was a good distraction, because we had to just put our sole focus on our daughters, and I would just continue working and knowing and just having faith in our marriage, having faith in the future, that it would all work out in the end. That, you sometimes you just have to just have that inspiration and that faith that things will work out. But yes, there was a lot of stress through that period of time. But I have to say, he, being a stay-at-home parent, especially when your kids are little, is probably the toughest job in the world. So, and he did it. It did such an amazing job, made so many friends along the way. A lot of the moms, it was hard for him. He was the only dad in all the play groups, bringing the little kids around. So he was kind of known in our town as being the one stay-at-home dad who would take, his two daughters around and go grocery shopping and doing all the things that a stay-at-home parent does.
There's a note that Tom refers to in the book that you left in the car when he was doing his first ultra marathon.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, because I think that's such a powerful moment in the book and clearly had a real impact on Tom.
Yeah. He was taking on this crazy challenge of running 100 plus miles over 24 hours, and
Circle.
in a circle. I don't know who would want to do that. They're only crazy people.
A very special kind of
You
person.
got to have a
does
little
that.
bit of a screw loose in the brain. Yes. Oh, I agree. Only a special person.
Dante's Inferno, I think there's 9 circles of hell. I was in one of those circles.
Yes. And, he said, I'm doing this on my own. And, he was fighting demons at this time. And I think it was a cathartic moment to run the 100 miles and to get this all done. But I knew it was going to be tough for him. That's a huge challenge to undertake. And we went on and cheered him on. But I did slip a note into his stuff in the car. And I said, you haven't slept on us, we won't sleep on you, something to that effect. And I'm glad he saw it and read it and inspired him to keep going, because he did. Throughout this process, I honestly think most people would have just given up, would say, I'm never going to find another job. What can I do in my life? And really spiral out of control. And Tom is a pretty internal person. So I know he took a lot of the stress of the whole situation over these years. He internalized it all. But I think most people would have cracked under all this pressure and not knowing, as a young person. I'm trying to remember how old you were, but as a
29.
29, as a 29-year-old, not knowing what the future holds and knowing all the hard work you put in through high school, college, internships, all of it, you know, he'll never get that back. And to have the strength to figure out what am I going to do with my life, I think that says a lot about Tom as a person and his strength. And I was there to support him, whether it was through running or his career. When he first told me he wanted to pursue speaking as a career, I was like, "Ooh, I don't know. Are you sure about this? Are you gonna make any money doing this?" And he's proven me wrong. And he's a really, I honestly, he's changed a lot of lives with his presentation. So I think, you know, getting up there on stage every time he has to present is not an easy thing to talk about the worst time of your life, but he does it, and I think it helps a lot of people.
When did you first get to hear it or sort of know what he was going to say? Because I get it. I'm going to talk
Right.
about myself, and you kind of go, well, I know I can imagine all the sort of thought process. Well, is anybody going to listen to this? Is this going to work? Is this going to be embarrassing? Is he going to
Right.
There's a whole load of sort of loving thoughts that you could have that would go, is this a good idea? So when did you first get to
Right.
hear what he was saying?
So it's funny. I've only seen his presentation live 3 times now, and it was at 3 very different stages of his career. Because now it's been what, like 8 years or not
10 years now.
10 years you've been doing
I
it.
saw that library.
So yeah, my first experience was one of his first times speaking. It was at a local library. I think it was maybe his like 5th present. I don't know. Very early on, a local library. There were maybe 15, 20 people in the audience, mostly, I would say, senior citizens, mostly on the old side. And so it was very unpolished. He didn't really have any slides. He kind of just talked about his situation. And the response he got was really great. Everyone was really riveted and asked a lot of questions. And I wasn't expecting that sort of response. I thought, are people just going to end up sleeping or walking out since it was a free event? So that was number one, the first time I saw him. And then the second time I saw him was several years later. It was in late 2019, where he spoke at a conference in Amsterdam. And so I went with him. We spent a long weekend there. And it was a pretty big conference. I don't know, several hundred people in the audience. So that was a whole different experience of seeing him up on the stage and talking, more in a business sense to, I think it was a compliance conference. And then the last time I saw him was, and it's reflected late in the book, the last chapter of the book was on a cruise we took last year where he had been hired to speak on the Explorer cruise line. And just to see the progress, it was pretty amazing because the last time prior to that I had seen him was in 2019, and here it was 2025. And to see how he captivated people on a cruise ship who really, a lot of them probably didn't know what insider trading even means. And to talk about the more human side of his story was really great. So I have to say, he's really good at what he does. I'll have to say that.
But it's definitely proven to work, that's for sure. But I can imagine as you're sitting there, and obviously we'll come on and talk, because I think the cruise ship, and this is featured in the book, is a pivotal sort of shift and is, in a sense, allowing us to have this conversation as well. But before that, when you're watching him talk about it, is there a sense that this, do you have a sort of out-of-body experience in the sense that this is not about you, or are you consciously aware that this is a story that you're involved in?
A little bit of both, actually. Yeah. Sometimes I'm like, oh, well, this is someone else. This is someone else's story. And then when he flashes pictures at the end of his wife and kids, and I'm like, oh, that's me. I guess I was involved in that. Yes, it's a little bit of an out of body experience. Also because he has to relive it day in and day out, and I'm a little more removed from it because it happened a while ago, but it's still fresh in his mind given it's his career. But you know, it comes out and it's fresh in my mind. And now, especially with the book coming out, it'll be very fresh in our minds again. So yeah, I've sometimes forget what life was like. We are very happy and fortunate to be, where we are in life. And I almost, sometimes you put a block in your head about the bad times. It's like giving birth. You forget how painful it was because you're like, let's have another one. I kind of forget there were some bad years where we were every day, we were stressed. We were thinking of moving. Do we sell our house? We can't afford this. I didn't want to leave. We live in the same town with my family where I grew up. I didn't want to leave them, but we were looking at homes in other parts of the country and cheaper locations. Like we were really struggling of what we were going to do. So to come out of it how we have, and hopefully more, good times ahead for us. Again, as long as we have our faith in each other, faith in our family and what we're doing, I think the future is bright, hopefully.
Talk about the cruise ship experience, which is the first time that the first session is Tom doing his normal routine. And then you have this conversation
Right.
about why don't you join me on stage to give your side of the. How was that for you? Were you expecting that conversation? Were you ready for? How did you react?
Well, I was expecting it only because Tom said, I think this would be a good idea. But of course, I don't do this. I'm not a public speaker. This is really only the second time I've talked about this. This after the cruise, I didn't talk again about it. So I'm not as polished or as good of a speaker as my husband is. But it felt good. It felt good to tell my side of the story and to have such a warm reception from the passengers on the cruise ship, from everyone. I couldn't have asked for just a better reaction to my side. One of the passengers, in fact, came up to me because he did a first session and then he kind of previewed, like, at the next session, my wife's gonna join me. And a woman came up after the first session and said, oh, I can't wait to hear your side of the story. I'll be there for the second session. And so when we had it a few days later, she came up to me before I got on stage because I had told her, oh, I'm pretty nervous. I've never spoken about this. And this is my first time speaking. And she gave me a beautiful bracelet that had a cross on it. And, it had a message of faith, and she was so lovely. And so I wore that bracelet up on stage, and it really was nice. And all the reception from everyone was really, really positive.
And did it feel cathartic for you? Because one of the senses I get from Tom is, sure, he's done this loads and loads of times, but there's a release by being able to talk about these things. And I would imagine with some of the experiences you've talked about, Sue, that having some way of letting those out, sort of just being able to tell your side of what happened, because you are a key component in this,
right?
Must have been a relief in some senses.
Yes. Yeah, it was a relief. I think talking about it fully to people outside of our normal network kind of felt good. And to have the response that we had was really, really nice. It was a little strange doing it, on vacation, but and before we did all this, I said, who's going to want to listen to Tom's story while they're on vacation? Like it just didn't make sense to me. And then when I saw him do the presentation and how good he is and how interesting it was, because it had been so long since I had seen the presentation, I said, oh, actually, if I was a passenger on this cruise ship and knew nothing, I would have been entertained. So yes, it was cathartic. It was nice to be up there, and we're planning to do it more this year.
We were invited back solely because of Sue's performance, not
No.
Our daughters actually saw the story, me tell the shipwreck story for the first time. So they were both there, teenagers. And then they saw Sue and they said, oh, Mom's so much better. Dad, I know you do this professionally, but Mom, so much better. So the cruise ship invited us back for 4 cruises this year. So but Sue will go first and then I'll go.
Yeah.
But in a way, it's interesting, Susan, because it's such back to these sort of, is this going to work as a career for Tom? You sort of go, it's a bit weird to be talking about yourself. I think we're naturally not programmed to do that. And so I think if we find other sort of environments where people talk about themselves, it kind of feels like an odd thing. It's a bit nerve-wracking because we're not used to it. And so I think it's really interesting hearing you, because I'm imagining that you're almost living through what Tom went through X years ago, which is people want to, how do I turn this thing into something people want to listen to? Because the natural thing is, and that's why it didn't occur to him as a career in the first place. No, there isn't a market for this stuff. And so you're suddenly discovering actually there is, and people are interested in it, and you can do it. And so I guess it's an unexpected turn, and it's an interesting thing to practice, because it's not a natural thing that we generally do.
Correct. All of that is correct. And I'm still not good at it. I mean, obviously Tom's polished. He's done this a million times, but yes, I'm not someone who likes to talk about their life or themselves, but I'm fully supportive of Tom, and I want his story and everything he's learned from it to get out there to as many people as possible.
As you sort of look on this experience, I talked with Tom a little bit about this earlier, the sort of parallel universe thing, because sometimes things happen, and particularly in your case, it's somebody else's decision making that has led you into this particular thing. Do you ever sort of think back to parallel universes, or this is your life now, so you're just embracing where you are, I guess, and seem to be flourishing in that world?
That's a good question, actually. I think in one sense it doesn't do any good to think what if, but Tom likes to play this game with our girls sometimes and say, well, I don't know if he mentioned this or not, but you did. Sure, yeah, about the professor saying, okay, well, if you didn't get caught and you would have made $20 whatever million. And our daughter's like, oh man, why? But all that said, I said, girls, you don't remember this probably, or remember parts of it because you were so young, but it's very rare for a father to be with his children and to be a sole caregiver, especially in the early years of their lives. And I said, that is time that it's priceless, right? You can't put money on that time that he had with them and how close they are with him. And now I feel like it was just meant to be, that this was his path in life. And in looking back, I always think he never, to me, had the personality to be a hedge fund trader. I being in investment banking and being amongst those type of people, like, doesn't quite fit the mold in my mind of what a hedge fund trader is, right? And so I think he found his path, as crazy as it is, into a life I never expected, and we're happy that he's here and made it through.
And I kind of feel like you found yours, because again, this wasn't a role that you selected. You didn't sort of sign the employment contract as caregiver and supporter to this particular thing, but it's where you are. And it strikes me that as you talk about, I won't say his destiny, but his sort of, the outcome for Tom. But if I look at you've also, it's been difficult, no two ways about that, but you're kind of flourishing in that role. It seems to have brought out, I guess Tom always talks about the fact that he made one good decision, which was marrying you. And that's very, very clear. You're very supportive. But it seems to me that you're kind of flourishing in this environment as well. You serve a really useful purpose here to support him in his mission. Or to put it another way, he couldn't do it without.
Oh, well, thank you. I haven't even thought about that, but I guess that's true. Yeah, I love being his partner in life, and I'm here to support him however he needs me to support him. I forget whose idea was for me to speak on the cruise ship. I think we
were talking to you when you were laying on the deck. You want to do this?
Yeah.
Me on the stage.
But I didn't even hesitate. I said, whatever you need me to do to support your career and what would be the best for you, I'm here for it. And I'm happy that he's built this career literally with no help. It's all been him throughout the whole time, outside of a family help. But he did this all on his own.
But I think that's a huge part of this, because if I think about people that are self-employed, you do to a certain extent lean on your partner, because you, for all the sort of many of the functions that are fulfilled either well or badly by your employer, you sort of have to get them at home.
Right.
And so it strikes me that although this kind of happened by accident, you're a partner in this business. And you sort of signed up to support this. And so as I look at it, you're absolutely right. He's the front man. But my sense very much is that the ability to do it, and that's everything from, somebody has to look after the kids while he's on one of his global tours,
Right.
just the sort of the willingness to put up with the bits that go with being a self-employed and never being able to, and there are benefits as well, but you've kind of signed into that. And so you are a joint partner in this venture. And so I love the idea that you're kind of coming from backstage or sitting in the audience and applauding loudly to being on stage with him. Feels like the right place, because I think you are an integral part of this story.
Oh, well, thank you. Hopefully not too many stage. I'm not a good public speaker, nor do I enjoy it, but, well, thank you. I appreciate that comment. So I'm, again, here to support Tom, however is necessary.
Yeah. And she always said, you got us into this, Tom. You're going to get us out of this. Like, that was always the mantra, like, through the years, stay-at-home dad. Like, you got us into this. The job search isn't going well. Yes, you'll get us out of this. You'll figure it out. There was always that optimism. Let's go ahead and buy, the dream house on the double income. Whoops, we don't have double income. We're going to have to figure it out. And she had the spreadsheet that was, hey, here's how much liquidity we have left. Oh, it says like 16 months. Like, yeah, we're going to have to sell the house in 15 months. She had her spreadsheets. And then I shared in the book, the first time I got paid one time for one talk, I said, all right, you're done working. And what are you, crazy? She's very much by the book, was just like, this isn't going to work. But I just figured, okay, now this is my next mountain I have to climb. I have to figure out a way to make sense of this, being a person with this past and seeking the value in it. And is it even possible to make a living doing it and doing it the right way, not doing it the wrong way.
Two things we should come back to. One is the book. Tell people who's it for?
I mean, the book is for anybody who likes, there's a group of people that like thrillers. And so it's really, when you get into the story, it's a page-turning thriller, wearing a wire, crazy situations. There was no training from the FBI for me. I was just thrown into situations. So trying to figure that out on my own. So it's just a gripping memoir. But also, I want people to see that everybody has scars to some degree, and that your scars can become sort of your service, and that you don't drown by falling in the water, you drown by staying there. And so being able to get out, look at what happened in our lives and make sense of it and own it. And so I'm hoping people see that too. Maybe somebody listening is going through a tough time. These are the stories I always share with you after conferences when people line up and talk to me about their worst decisions or their worst moments. And I'm hoping that there's something in this book about, either accepting responsibility or getting help, getting outside your head, talking to people in your network. And really, I think the hardest part for people, and I still struggle with this, is self-forgiveness. When something like this happens that's self-inflicted, like forgiving yourself. And I still occasionally will have a thought coming in, I'm not good enough, or I shouldn't be doing this. And I just know that that's a thought that's just passing through my head. And so that's just something too that I hope people can take from it. And also for my corporate clients, I also have a companion discussion guide. So feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to bulk order the book. I have a facilitator notes and everything if you'd like to break up the chapters by modules and go way beyond a memoir and get actually, training value out of it. I have that discussion guide too. I'm happy to share.
Amazing. And before I let you go, remind us what the book is called, who it's published by, and I'm supposed to say where you can get it. I think that's kind of obvious, but give us all of that information.
The book is Wired on Wall Street, published by Wiley, available where all books are sold.
And if people want to find you, where do they go?
I'm at tipperx.com. I just learned from the U.S. Patent Office a few weeks ago that I've now trademarked TipperX. So if you look up TipperX, I can now legally in the U.S. be the only TipperX for the rest of time, I guess.
So these reputation cleaning people that keep content, you're going to have even more work to do because there's a trademark to get rid of as well. Tom, as ever when we talk, thank you so much for just being you and telling some amazing stories. The book is fantastic. It comes highly, highly, highly recommended. I read it in one sitting because I was captivated and I can't wait to get it into people's hands. And of course, I want to say huge thanks to Sue for making her podcasting debut, talking about the story. I hope that we get to hear lots more from her in the future. I think, as I said, she's an integral part of it. So my thanks to her. But once again, to you, thank you so much for being a great guest on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Christian. It's a pleasure to be back.
So that's it for this episode of the show. My enormous thanks to Tom and, of course, to Sue. I really don't take for granted the trust they've shown in choosing this podcast to be the first one where she speaks publicly about this. And, of course, my thanks to you for listening. To find out more about Wired on Wall Street, to hire Tom as a speaker, to read his always insightful LinkedIn and Substack content, And to find links to his previous appearances on the show, have a look in the show notes. There are links to all of those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk podcast, where have you been? But thank you so much for joining me. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. I will be back very soon with another episode of this show. But in the meantime, plenty for us to think about from Tom's episode. I highly recommend reading Wired on Wall Street. And if you haven't listened to the previous episodes featuring Tom, do that as well. But in the meantime, stay safe. And remember, we can all make bad decisions, but equally, it is possible for us to turn them round. I think there's some fascinating lessons from Tom's story, and I hope you've taken something away from the episode. I'll see you very soon, another episode of the Human Risk Podcast.